Hey guys, welcome to the first edition of Album of the Week. This is a segment that I really want to get started on this channel because I don't put regular content out these days, but I'd like to get back into it. And this is, as the name suggests, just an idea to just really rant and give you sort of like an idea about what I'm listening to and just go in depth on the album that I listen to most during like a particular week. Yeah, I think this could be a bit of fun because, you know, there'll be a varied kind of collection of music here. From one week it could be a new album from the year, or it could be like a back catalogue album from some obscure band, some obscure artist. So this will be good fun, it'll be varied, and it won't be like reviewing like the latest albums that are coming out. And that really appeals to me a little bit more, because there's so much great music out there which I haven't discovered yet, or in the process of discovering, and it's all from years ago. So this would be really good to get to talk about some of these. So let's get this started. So my album of the week this week has been this, which is Swans, the Seer, which came out in 2012. And as you can see, I've got the vinyl version of this. And Swans, if you're unfamiliar with them, are an experimental rock band from New York. And they sort of emerged out of the no-wave scene from New York in the early 80s. They've been going since about 83, I believe. And they, over the years, have dabbled in all kinds of genres, all the way from experimental rock to noise rock to folk, country, drone, you name it, they've probably done it. And this, The Seer, is the second of 3 albums that they have put out since their reformation in 2010. They split up in 97 or 98, I believe, and then Michael Gira, their frontman, reformed them, thankfully, in 2010. So, before I go into detail about this particular LP, I'll just let you have a brief indication of what to expect when you listen to Swans. From times they can sound hellish, they can sound chaotic, they can sound frightening, with all kinds of sound play, and they also sound calm, pretty and melancholic from other times as well. They have such a varied sound, which is part of the reason why I find these guys so interesting. I first heard about Swans about a year ago or so, but it's only been in the last half a year that I've started exploring some of their stuff, including this LP, which was the first one of their albums that I actually picked up. But like I said, they have such a varied sound that it's almost hard to pin them down, which is quite cool in a way. But like I said, you have all kinds of sounds that you can be expecting on this album, and in their whole repertoire, for example. The instrumentation used in their music is also extremely varied. Like as the rock kind of moniker would sort of suggest, they have loads of typical instrumentation in there, like a normal kind of drum set, obviously, electric guitars, acoustic guitar, bass, vocals, kind of standard stuff, but with some weird stuff thrown in there as well, including some extremely strange vocals. As well as some percussive instruments like xylophone or glockenspiel, I believe. Loads of different types of synths, which makes it interesting. So it's a very interesting and very varied sound palette, which means that you never quite know what to expect from song to song with these guys, which is another reason why they're so engaging and so interesting, like from one LP to the next. So, without much further ado, let's dive right into it and discuss some of the songs on this, and I'll walk you through it a little bit. So the first thing that really needs saying is this is an absolute behemoth of an album. It stands at 2 hours in length, including 11 tracks, one of which is 32 minutes, one is 23 minutes, and one is 19 minutes, the rest of which are below the 10-minute mark. But that's quite significant because I will say this, it is not an easy album to get into. It's almost to the point where it's an esoteric kind of album. You need to be listening to this kind of music, this kind of experimental side of music to really get it, or you need to have some kind of interest, you need to be researching it, or you need to be actively listening to a lot of music, or you just need to listen to it over and over and over and over again to sort of absorb it, because it does take a long time. 2 hours of experimental music is a lot to sort of take in. It's certainly taken, like me, a long time to get into this, but now I have like listened to it multiple times and I've like had time to digest a lot of what's been going on, I can safely say it's turned into one of my favourite albums from the year 2012. But this album sort of draws a lot of its power from its ability to repeat lots of patterns, to build up lots of patterns incrementally in some places, to produce drones and sort of build on them to really create the sense of tension and release, almost in a post-rock kind of style, but also incorporating like loads of different musical styles in it as well, which is really, really cool. The first song on this album, Lunacy, is a good example of this. It's a slightly shorter song, it's about 6 minutes in length, but it sort of gives you an idea, gives you an inclination of what to expect on the rest of the album. There's a lot of repeating patterns, a lot of repeating vocals. The one vocal which is really sort of hammered to heart is Lunacy, in this really wailing and crazy voice. And that's a good example to really hear what these guys do in terms of repeating certain like lines or certain patterns or rhythms or ostinatos. And it's the way that they do this and the way that they build atmosphere around it that makes a lot of these songs so powerful and so hypnotic, which is absolutely magnificent. The second song on here, The Apostate, which is one that I'd highly recommend, one that you should listen to if you want to get an idea for this record, is absolutely fantastic. I cannot fault this song. It's got some of the craziest and most melodramatic moments on this album in terms of the instrumentation and the vocals. It certainly features some of the weirdest vocals that I've heard, including the clip that I played earlier. Around about 8 minutes in or so, there's this section where it's a like crescendo and it's building up, and there are these constant hits where the drums and the guitars sync up, and then there are like lighter snare hits in between these sections. And to me, it sounds really weird and it sounds kind of cheesy, but to me it sounds like an engine trying to start up, but it's not like a ordinary engine. It's a brain which is trying to like go. It's trying to reawaken itself, but it's the brain of a madman. This is what this song is like. It is absolutely horrifying. It's fantastic. And then the second half of this song really explodes with the crazy vocals and eventually sort of climaxes in this insane drum roll right at the end, which has a lot of power and a lot of primal passion to it. So if you want a really good sort of example of what these guys are about on this album, definitely check out that song. It's definitely worth your while. The third song is also a highlight for me, and I'd really recommend this song as well, A Piece of the Sky, which is the 19-minute track on here. It starts off really slow with what sounds like burning coals, burning embers and paper or something strange like that, and eventually gives way to these very strange but angelic vocals which are layered in a deadpan kind of fashion. They're not doing much by themselves if you would separate them, for example, but together it creates this very strange but very entrancing kind of atmosphere, which is really, really nice. And then it breaks way into the bulk of the song, I suppose, which includes a 4/4 rhythm with a repeating sort of guitar pattern with hammer, dulcimer, with piano over the top. It's really quite beautiful. And then after that, it ends up leading into a folky or country style song. I've heard some people refer to this track as a folk or country song with a 15-minute build-up, which I find quite funny because when you listen to it, it makes sense if you look at it that way. It starts off quite quiet, it starts off quite strange, quite ambivalent. You don't know if it's going to be one of the scarier songs on the album, and it gives way to this very pretty, very quite melancholic in a way sound, which are two of the traits that I thought I'd mention earlier, because it is a good example of what to expect with these guys. And this song is able to blend both of those kind of ideas perfectly. So A Piece of the Sky is also a really good example of Swans. It gives you a good example of what this album's about as well. And then just following that is the most tortured piece on the album, in my opinion. It's one of the shorter songs on this album. I believe it's the third shortest on here. It's only about 5 minutes, which for a Swan song, or a Swan song on this album anyway, is pretty damn short. And it's just a collection of wailing strings at the beginning, which build up with again, some more deadpan vocals, but they're more breathy, they're more primal, and it's a male vocalist this time. And it ends up building into this hellish piece where the strings and the drums are absolutely unrelenting, and it sounds chaotic, it sounds nasty as hell. And then shortly after that is The Daughter Brings the Water, which is one of the nicer songs on the album. Nicer meaning it's a bit of a refrain from the previous song. In some ways it acts as a bit of a breather after listening to such a chaotic piece on the album. So that little section of the album, those two songs which follow on and segue into each other quite nicely, that's also a good part of the album that I'd recommend you check out. It shows some of the more experimental and drone and harsh rock side, going straight into some of the country and folk influences that these guys certainly have. The two songs that follow this, The Mother of the World and Avatar, sort of follow a formula of building up an idea and sort of pushing it, and they are interesting, but I won't go into those in too much detail, purely because the back end of this album is weighted down heavily with the title track, The Seer, which is a 32-minute beast, and this is a very interesting song. This song starts off with lots of extremely loud bagpipes with hammer dulcimer, with some bells and some very sparse drumming for the first few minutes or so. The bells actually even seem to be referencing the Avatar, one of the previous songs on here, but that's off the point. But the main sort of line, which is repeated throughout this as it starts to build up, is "I see it all, I see it all, I see it all." Michael Giora repeats this line over and over, and like I mentioned earlier about this album being hypnotic, this is one of the key points where it gets to that stage. This then builds slowly into a massive crescendo, which around about the 13 to 14 minute mark just absolutely explodes. There are these massive emphatic hits with the drums and the guitars, kind of similar to the Apostate where they sync up, and this builds and continues for quite a while before plateauing out again with some nice guitar work and an introduction to some harmonica, which actually sounds quite nice. The piece then ends, finally, in the last 4 minutes or so, with a nice grooving rhythm with more extravagant vocals. So if you're familiar with the rest of the album, this is like a continuation of that, some of Michael Giora's twisted sort of vocal lines, which is quite comical in a way, but also makes sense in the sense that this is a Swans album. This is going to have some extremely strange and off-kilter vocals. The final song on here, The Seer Returns, is probably my favourite song on here in terms of lyrics. It features some of my favourite dark lyrics on this album, and it features a really ballsy, really sort of bolshy rhythm in terms of the drums and the guitar work that goes on here, and it rounds it off quite nicely in my opinion, especially after such a long and lengthy and ambitious piece as The Seer, which is, like I said earlier, the 32-minute piece on this album. So these two songs at the end of the album work almost in a similar way to 93 Avenue Blues and The Daughter Brings the Water, in the fact that a lighter song comes after a very ambitious or a very hellish sounding piece. And that again for me sort of represents some of the musical and stylistic choices made on this album to really build up tension, to release tension in an almost post-rock sort of fashion. And this album, does it go out with a bang with these last two songs, the 32-minute title track and then The Seer Returns. It is absolutely magnificent, and I think this is a fantastic round-off for such an ambitious and such a long album, standing at 2 hours in length, like I said. So if any of this sounds like your cup of tea, definitely give this a listen. This is definitely a worthwhile album to check out. Very experimental stuff, but it is very rewarding music once you've given it repeated listens. I will give this a 9 out of 10. If you enjoyed some of the lighter elements of this album, such as The Daughter Brings the Water, with more folky or country side of the influence, I'd recommend you check out Angels of Light, which is Michael Giora's project that he started after Swans disbanded at the end of the 90s. So if that was a musical element that you enjoyed on this album, definitely go listen to that too. And as an extra bonus, on the back of the album is a motherfucking butthole. Check that out. Yeah. If you enjoyed this, let me know. I will hopefully be doing this once a week, which would be great fun. Let me know what you think of this album if you've listened to it. I'll be interested, because loads of different people seem to be into this band for different reasons. Loads of long-time music fans, lots of metal fans, lots of ambient and electronic fans seem to be into this kind of music. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. Again, if you like this, let me know, and I'll see you guys next time with another album of the week. See you soon. Out.